The worst part wasn't being told I wasn't wanted. The worst part was that I found out on a Tuesday morning, between my second cup of coffee and the load of laundry I was folding for my grandchildren, that the woman my son married had already decided what kind of old woman I was going to become, and she hadn't bothered to ask me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I spent 31 years as a registered nurse. I retired at 62, not because I had to, but because my husband had just been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's, and I wanted to be home with him while we still had good days together. We had 13 months of good days, then 8 months of harder ones. Then he was gone, and I was 63 years old, standing in our kitchen in Portland, Oregon, trying to remember how to make coffee for one person. My son was 34 when his father died. He and my daughter-in-law had been married for 6 years by then. They had 2 children, a girl who had just turned 5 and a boy who was 2, and they lived 40 minutes away in a suburb I had never particularly liked, but had never said so out loud. My daughter-in-law was the kind of woman who smiled at everything you said and agreed with nothing. You only figured that out later, usually when you were already too far in to change direction. After my husband passed, my son started coming by more. He brought the children on Sundays. He would sit at my kitchen table and eat whatever I made, and we would talk. Really talk. The way we hadn't since he was in college. I thought grief had softened something in him. I thought we were finding our way back to each other. What I didn't understand then, and would only understand much later, was that my son was coming by because my daughter-in-law had decided it was time to assess the situation. That's the word she used, I found out eventually. Assess. I owned 2 properties outright. My husband and I had bought our home in Portland in 1989. We had paid it off by 2011. We had also bought a small lake house in Cannon Beach in 2003. The kind of place you take children in the summer. The kind of place that smells like wood and sunscreen, and something you can never quite name. Both properties were in my name alone. My husband had insisted on that before he died. He was a quiet man, my husband, but he thought about things carefully, and he had told me, "Make sure nothing is ever in anyone else's name but yours." I had nodded and not fully understood why he was telling me that. I understood later. 6 months after my husband's funeral, my son asked if he and my daughter-in-law could move in for a while. He said they were doing some renovations on their house. He said it would only be 2 or 3 months. He had that look he used to get as a teenager when he wanted something, a kind of careful, practiced casualness, as if the question had just occurred to him. I said yes. Of course I said yes. They were my family. The house was too quiet. My granddaughter called me Grandma Maggie and would fall asleep on my lap during movies, and I would sit perfectly still so I wouldn't wake her, barely breathing, feeling like the luckiest woman alive. 2 months became 4. 4 became 7. The renovations were taking longer than expected. There were contractor issues. There were delays. I nodded and accepted every explanation, because accepting explanations was what I did. It was what I had always done in that family. I realized, accept the explanation and ask no further questions. By the time a year had passed, I had quietly stopped asking when they were leaving. My daughter-in-law had rearranged my kitchen. She had replaced my curtains with ones she said were more modern. She had taken over the primary bathroom and moved my things, in my own house into the smaller bathroom down the hall. I told myself this was what family looked like. I told myself I was being flexible. I told myself the word my husband had never been. Accommodating. I was paying all the utilities. I was buying most of the groceries. I had added my son to my credit card account during a week when he said they were short between paychecks. Just temporarily. Just to make it easier. That was 14 months before the Tuesday morning when everything changed. In the spring of that second year, my daughter-in-law suggested that the Cannon Beach house might be better used if they took it over on weekends. She said it was sitting empty most of the time. She said the children would benefit from having a consistent place to go. She said all of this in the same light, reasonable tone she used for everything, and I agreed without fully agreeing, the way I had learned to do in her presence. That summer they went to Cannon Beach 11 times. I went twice. Both times, at my own suggestion. Both times, met with a warmth that felt faintly like obligation. I am telling you all of this so that you understand what I was to them. I was not a mother. I was not a grandmother. I was a resource with a heartbeat. The text from my son came on the second Tuesday of October. I had spent the morning doing laundry, as I said. My granddaughter's little socks. My grandson's pajamas. With the dinosaurs on them. I folded them and put them in neat piles and thought about nothing in particular. Then my phone buzzed on the counter. Mom, I've been meaning to talk to you about Thanksgiving. Sarah and I talked about it, and we think this year we want to do something different. We're going to Sarah's parents in Scottsdale. Just the four of us. Really keep it small. I know it's not what you expected. We'll see you at Christmas for sure. I read it 3 times. Then I set my phone down on the counter, very carefully, next to the neat pile of my granddaughter's socks, and I stood at my kitchen window and looked at the backyard, my backyard, with my rose bushes and my bird feeder and the oak tree my husband had planted the year we moved in, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not grief exactly. Something quieter and more permanent than grief. Something that felt like recognition. I didn't call him back. I didn't ask why. I didn't cry. I walked to the living room, sat down in my husband's chair, and thought about the last 2 years with the kind of clarity that only arrives when you finally stop hoping you're wrong. I thought about the kitchen curtains. I thought about my bathroom things moved down the hall. I thought about 11 weekends at Cannon Beach and 2 invitations that felt like charity. I thought about the credit card statement I had stopped opening because the numbers made me feel sick, and I hadn't wanted to deal with it yet. That afternoon, I opened it. My son and daughter-in-law had put $23,400 on my card in 14 months. Clothing, restaurants, a weekend in Seattle I hadn't been told about, school supplies, what appeared to be a new set of luggage. The minimum payment had been going out automatically. I had been paying it without looking because I had trusted that they were being careful, because I had decided that trusting people was the same as loving them. I sat with that number for a long time. The following Monday, I had a meeting scheduled with my financial advisor, a routine quarterly review. Nothing urgent. I had almost canceled it. I'm glad I didn't. I told him what was happening. I told him about the text. I told him about the credit card. I told him about the house and the Cannon Beach property and the 2 years of utilities and groceries. He was a careful man, methodical, the kind of person who writes things down and waits until you're finished before he speaks. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Margaret, I need to show you something." He turned his computer screen toward me. It was an email. It had come to him 3 weeks earlier, from a law firm in Portland. The email asked about the process for establishing a conservatorship for an elderly parent. It asked specifically about what would be required to demonstrate that a parent was no longer capable of managing their own financial affairs. It asked about timelines. It asked about property. The email was from my daughter-in-law. My financial advisor had not responded to it. He had flagged it and saved it, uncertain what to do, waiting to see if I brought anything to him that would make the context clearer. The context was now perfectly clear. I sat in that office chair and looked at that email and felt my entire body go very still. The way I used to go still in the ER when a situation turned serious and panic would only make things worse. I had spent 31 years learning how to be still in bad moments. I was grateful for it now. I asked my financial advisor what my options were. He told me. We talked for 2 hours. I wrote things down. I asked questions. I did not cry. That evening I drove to Cannon Beach alone. I stood on the deck of my lake house and watched the water and talked out loud to my husband for the first time since the week after his funeral. I asked him what he would do. I thought I already knew the answer. He was a man who believed in clear, quiet action. He believed in doing what needed to be done, without drama and without apology. Over the next 3 weeks, I did the following things. I contacted a real estate attorney. I was the sole owner of both the Portland house and the Cannon Beach property. I had no legal obligation to notify or consult anyone before selling either. I listed the Cannon Beach house with a realtor I trusted, a woman I had known for 15 years, the wife of one of my husband's former colleagues. The property sold in 9 days. In the Pacific Northwest market, a lakefront property in good condition sells quickly. It sold for $618,000. My husband and I had paid $187,000 for it in 2003. I had maintained it carefully for 20 years. I opened a new bank account at a different bank, in my name only, and transferred the proceeds there. I contacted the credit card company and removed my son from the account. I did not close the account. I simply removed him. I had every legal right to do this. I did not tell him in advance. I called my sister in Savannah. We had not spoken as much as we should have over the years. The distance, the busyness, the usual excuses. She is 3 years older than I am and has lived in the same house in Savannah since 1987 and knows everyone in her neighborhood by name. She cried when I told her what had happened. Then she told me there was a small rental house 2 blocks from her that had just come available. She would send me the listing. I did not tell my son I was leaving. I did not tell my daughter-in-law. I gave myself 2 weeks to prepare. I want to be careful here about how I describe what followed, because I have been asked whether I felt guilty. The honest answer is that I expected to feel guilty, and I didn't. What I felt instead was a kind of astonishment at myself. Mostly, at how long I had confused compliance with love, at how many things I had quietly accepted over 2 years that I would never have accepted in any other context. I was a woman who had spent 3 decades making difficult decisions calmly under pressure. I had stood at bedsides and delivered news that broke families open and still held the room together. And yet in my own house, in my own kitchen, I had let a woman replace my curtains and move my things down the hall and had called it flexibility. My husband would have recognized this. He was more perceptive about people than I was. I think he knew, in some part of himself, even before he got sick, that I was going to need to figure out how to protect myself from my own generosity. I think that's why he made sure everything was in my name. The morning I left, I woke at 5. My son and daughter-in-law were still asleep. The children were still asleep. I had already moved everything I cared about, my photo albums, my mother's china, my husband's watch collection, the small painting that had hung in our first apartment, my nursing pins, the letters my husband wrote me when we were long distance in the early years. I had already moved it all into a storage unit I rented. On the other side of the city, I had done it in 3 trips over 3 weeks, early mornings. While everyone slept, what I left behind was furniture, appliances, a stocked refrigerator, and a letter. The letter was 1 page. I had written it 4 times before I was satisfied. It said, "By the time you read this, I will be on my way to Savannah. The Cannon Beach property was sold 3 weeks ago. The proceeds are mine. The credit card has been updated. You will need to make your own arrangements. I am aware of the inquiry made to a conservatorship attorney in September. I want you to know that I am in excellent health. I am of completely sound mind, and I have spent 31 years making hard decisions for other people's benefit. I am now making one for my own. The house in Portland is still mine. You are welcome to stay through the end of the month. After that, I will need you to make other arrangements. I have left contact information for a realtor if that would be helpful. To my grandchildren, I love you both more than you will ever understand. None of this is about you. I will call you every Sunday. That will not change. I do not need you to understand this. I only need you to know that it happened." I set the letter on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker I had bought with my first paycheck as a nurse in 1986. I looked around the kitchen for a moment. The curtains my daughter-in-law had chosen were pale gray linen. They were perfectly nice curtains, they just weren't mine. I walked out the front door at 5:40 in the morning. I did not look back. Not because I wasn't sad, but because there is a difference between sadness and regret, and I had one of them and not the other. I drove to the airport in the early dark, the kind of Pacific Northwest autumn dark that settles into your bones if you let it. I didn't let it. I had a carry-on bag and my husband's watch, and enough miles on my airline account for a first-class ticket, which I had never used before, and which felt appropriate for the occasion. My sister was waiting at the Savannah airport with a hand-lettered sign that said Margareta Leaner, and underneath it, in smaller letters, "Finally, she is 3 years older than me and has not lost her sense of humor." We drove to her house with the windows down even though it was October, because in Savannah in October you can still do that. And she talked the whole way, and I mostly listened, and somewhere on that drive, I started to feel something that took me a moment to identify. It was the particular lightness of a woman who has stopped carrying things that were never hers to carry. My son called that evening. I let it go to voicemail. He called again the next morning. I listened to the message. His voice was tight in the way it got when he was trying to sound calm while not being calm. He said he needed to talk to me. He said he didn't understand what was happening. He said my daughter-in-law was very upset. He did not, in either message, say he was sorry. He texted as well. The texts were longer than the voicemails. He said the Cannon Beach sale was a surprise. He said the credit card change had caused problems. He said he thought we should talk before I made any more decisions. He said he was worried about me. I thought about that word for a long time. Worried. There is a version of worry that is about the person you're worried about. And there is a version of worry that is about what that person's choices mean for you. I had learned to tell the difference in the ER. I was quite certain which version this was. I texted back 3 days after I arrived in Savannah. I said, "I am well. I am with Aunt Carol. I am not available to discuss the house or the finances right now. I will be in touch when I'm ready." I called my grandchildren on Sunday, as I had promised. My granddaughter told me about a project she was doing at school about butterflies. She said she wanted to show me her drawings. I said I would love that. She asked when I was coming back. I said I wasn't sure yet, but that I would come see her soon, and she could show me everything. She said okay, and told me she loved me, and then my grandson got on the line and breathed at me for about 30 seconds before dropping the phone. I sat in my sister's kitchen and laughed until my eyes watered. It has been 4 months now. I am living in the rental house 2 blocks from my sister. It is small and a little drafty in the corners, and I have already started a garden in the backyard and planted the same roses I had in Portland. The neighborhood is quiet in a way Portland hadn't been for years. People here know their neighbors. Someone left a pie on my front porch last month. A real pie. Pecan. With a note that said, "Welcome to the block. I have not received a welcome pie in 30 years. My son called twice more in November. The second time, I answered. We talked for 40 minutes. He said many things. Some of them were the right things, said with real feeling. And some of them were careful things designed to reopen a conversation I had already closed. I listened to all of it. I told him I loved him. I told him that what had happened between us had happened over years, not days, and that it would take more than a phone call to address it. I told him I was not angry, which was true, but that I was also not available to return to a situation that had required me to become invisible in my own home. He was quiet for a long time after that. Then he said, "I should have said something. When she moved your things out of your bathroom, I saw that and I didn't say anything." I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm sorry, Mom." I said, "I know you are. We are still working out what comes next." That is the honest answer. It is not a clean resolution. Real things rarely are. My daughter-in-law has not called. I did not expect her to. My son is navigating something complicated in his own marriage now that the financial arrangement has changed. And I have made a deliberate choice not to involve myself in that navigation. It is not my marriage. It is not my problem to solve. The Portland house goes on the market next month. My realtor says it will sell quickly. It is a good house in a good neighborhood with original hardwood floors and a backyard with an oak tree and rose bushes that have been carefully tended for 35 years. I hope whoever buys it has children who will climb that oak tree. I hope they have a dog that digs up the rose bushes at least once so they know what it feels like to have something you love survive being dug up. I thought, when all of this was happening, that the hardest part would be the loss. The loss of Sunday dinners and the children on my lap and the familiar shape of a life I had built. And there is loss. I won't pretend otherwise. I miss my granddaughter's face. I miss the weight of my grandson when he falls asleep against my shoulder. I miss the house on mornings when the light came through the kitchen window at a certain angle and everything looked golden and possible. But I have learned something in these 4 months that I wish someone had told me 20 years ago, when I was first learning to fold myself smaller to fit into other people's definitions of me. The loss of what you built is survivable. What is not survivable, what hollows you out so slowly you don't notice until you're almost empty, is spending your whole self on people who have decided in advance what kind of person you are, who have decided you are old before you are old, who have decided you are diminished before you have diminished, who have looked at everything you built and everything you sacrificed and seen, above all of it, an asset they hadn't finished extracting from. My husband used to say that love is not the same thing as debt. He said it to me once, quietly, after a holiday dinner that had gone badly in a way I couldn't quite articulate. I didn't understand it then. I thought he was being abstract. He wasn't. Love is not debt. You cannot owe someone love for the love you gave them. You cannot bankrupt yourself extending credit to people who intend to spend you down to zero. You can decide, at any point, that the account is closed. You can decide this at 63 years old, on a Tuesday morning, holding your granddaughter's little socks, reading a text message that finally says out loud what has been true for 2 years. You can decide this, and you can act on it, and you can get on a plane and drive through Savannah in October with the windows down and feel something you thought you had lost with your husband 4 years ago. You can decide to belong to yourself again. The roses I planted last month have just started to take. The neighbor's cat sits on my fence every morning and watches me water them with an expression of profound skepticism. I have started going for a walk every morning at 6, before the heat comes in. My sister meets me at the corner of her street, and we walk the block down to the little park by the water. And sometimes we talk, and sometimes we don't, and it doesn't matter either way. This morning I was watering the roses, and my granddaughter called me, on her own, from my son's phone. She said she had finished her butterfly project and it got a gold star, and she wanted me to know. I said that was the best news I had heard all week. She said she drew a picture for me and asked if she could mail it to me. I gave her the address. I went back to watering my roses, and I thought, this is enough. This, right here, is more than enough. I am not a woman waiting to be invited back into my life. I left my own front door at 5:40 in the morning, and I have not stopped moving since, and I intend to keep moving, through Savannah, through whatever comes next, through all the good mornings and the hard ones, and the ordinary Tuesdays that turn out to matter more than you expected. My name is Margaret. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years taking care of other people, and I was glad to do it. I raised a son who is going to have to learn some things the hard way. And I hope he learns them. I really do. But I am done being the lesson.